A single mother was invited to a fancy dinner by an unknown millionaire. He pretended to be disabled. She fell. But the plan was much more cruel than it seemed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We will continue. The scent of hydrangeas filled the small space of the flower shop as Isabel methodically arranged the flowers on the worn wooden counter. Her delicate fingers touched each petal with an almost maternal care, as if each flower could feel the weight of the worries she carried on her shoulders. The clock on the wall read almost 6 in the evening, and through the dusty window, she watched the movement on the street gradually slow down, as it always did at that time in the small neighborhood in the countryside. The last unpaid bills weighed on his wallet as much as on his conscience. 3 months of overdue rent, electricity bills with red warnings, and most importantly, Alice's medicine. His little Alice, with her big, curious eyes that always seemed to question the world around her. The little girl that fate had placed in his arms through the most painful of circumstances. The doorbell rang softly, bringing Isabel back to reality. It was Donna Mila, the pharmacist from the corner, who came in, her worn slippers dragging across the floor. "I brought your chamomile tea, dear," the lady said, placing a small package on the counter. "And that natural syrup I told you about. It might help with Alice's asthma." Isabel forced a smile, feeling the familiar weight of gratitude mixed with embarrassment. "You didn't have to bother, Donna Mila. You already do so much." "Nonsense," the lady interrupted, adjusting her old-fashioned glasses. "That girl is an angel, and you deserve all the support after everything you've been through." The words hung in the air like suspended dust. Everything that had happened. No one there really knew what had happened. The fire, yes. Everyone knew the story of the fire that took her younger sister. But the details, the secrets whispered. On sleepless nights, the documents hidden at the bottom of the drawer, those belonged only to Isabel. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, and her stomach dropped as she saw the number for the social services office. Another scheduled hearing, another day of explanations, another time when she would have to prove that she deserved to be Alice's mother. As if love could be measured by bank statements and proof of residence. "I have to close early today," Isabel said, starting to gather flowers outside. "Alice has an appointment." Donna Mila nodded understandingly and left, leaving behind the scent of her old perfumes mixed with the flowers. Isabel began her closing ritual, checking the meager cash register, wiping down the counters, organizing the orders for the next day. There was something comforting about the routine, even in its simplicity. That was when she noticed the black car, too imposing for that narrow street, parked in front of the flower shop. The driver, a tall man with sunglasses and a military posture, got out with precise movements. Through the tinted glass, she could have sworn she saw a silhouette watching her. The man entered the store with measured steps, carrying a black envelope that seemed to absorb all the light around it. "Miss Isabel Santos." His voice was deep and controlled, as if each word was chosen with extreme care. "Yes," she replied, instinctively taking a step back. "I have something for you, miss." He held out the envelope in one fluid motion. "Please read it carefully." Before she could ask any questions, he had already left, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and an envelope that weighed much more than it should have. With trembling fingers, Isabel opened the black seal. Inside, a single handmade card bore a phrase in elegant calligraphy: "I would like to offer you a dinner in appreciation of your kindness." Below it was just one address that she recognized immediately: the Hotel Elysium, that imposing building on the hill that dominated the city skyline. The Hotel Elysium was not just a hotel, it was an urban legend, a monument to the city's history, a former sanatorium that had housed the country's elite in the 19th century. Its Art Deco walls held stories that people preferred not to tell, and its terrace was the stage for events that only the most privileged could attend. Isabel. Reread the card several times, looking for a signature, an explanation, anything that made sense. What kindness? To whom? Why? The questions multiplied in her mind as she put the envelope in her purse, determined to ignore it. At home, Alice was waiting for her, with her sketchbook spread out on the kitchen table. The little girl had inherited her biological mother's artistic talent, and each line in her drawings seemed to tell stories that her 8-year-old voice could not yet express. "Aunt Isa!" Alice exclaimed, running to hug her. The title of aunt was a necessary little lie, a way of explaining to the world a relationship that went far beyond legal definitions. "Hi, my love." Isabel hugged her tightly, feeling her small, warm body against hers. "How was your day? Are you feeling better?" Alice nodded, but her breathing still had that familiar wheeze that made Isabel's heart clench. "I made a new drawing," the girl said, pulling her by the hand to the table. The drawing showed 2 figures holding hands, one large and one small, surrounded by colorful flowers. In the corner of the paper was a 3rd figure, smaller and darker, like a shadow. Isabel knew exactly what that meant. It was Helena, her sister, Alice's biological mother, who appeared in the girl's drawings as a constant, silent presence. As she prepared a simple dinner, rice, beans, and the last eggs, in the fridge, Isabel couldn't stop thinking about the black envelope. The Hotel Elysium address seemed to burn in her purse, a dangerous and inexplicable temptation. Night came, bringing with it a fine, melancholic rain. Alice slept in her room, her wheezing breathing a little more controlled after Donna Mila's syrup. Isabel sat on the apartment's small balcony, a cup of cold tea in her hands, and allowed herself to think about the impossible. The invitation was for the following evening. She had a dress, stored like a relic in the back of her closet, a gift from her mother, hand-sewn for her graduation that never happened. Life had other plans back then, plans that included caring for a troubled sister and eventually an orphaned niece. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror told the story of the past few years. A few premature grey streaks in her brown hair, lines around her eyes that had never been there before, a shadow of weariness that seemed permanent. But there was something else there, something that the black envelope had awakened, a spark of curiosity, maybe even hope. The decision was made sometime between midnight and dawn as she mentally organized her life. Alice would stay with Donna Mila, who always offered to take care of the girl. The dress still fit, although a little tighter than it had been 10 years ago. And as for fear, well, fear was an old companion that she had learned to carry. The next night, after putting Alice to bed at Donna Mila's house with promises to return soon, Isabel allowed herself to be someone else. The midnight blue dress hugged her body like a second skin, revealing curves that she usually hid under aprons and loose blouses. Her hair, normally tied in a practical bun, cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. The same black car was waiting for her at the corner, punctual as a Swiss watch. The driver, still wearing sunglasses even at night, opened the door without saying a word. The interior of the vehicle smelled of new leather and some expensive perfume that she couldn't identify. The drive up to the Hotel Elysium was silent, each bend in the road revealing more of the city that spread out below like a carpet of flickering lights. The hotel itself was an imposing sight, a 19th century building that blended Gothic and Art Deco elements, its tall windows glowing like golden eyes in the darkness. The driver led her not through the main entrance, but down a side path. That led to a private elevator. The doors opened directly onto a rooftop garden, a space that seemed to exist in another dimension. Vintage oil lamps illuminated the room with amber light, casting dancing shadows on the ivy-covered walls. A glass waterfall cascaded down one wall, its soft murmur creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. And then she saw him. Sitting in a modern wheelchair with clean chrome lines was a man she immediately recognized from newspapers and business magazines. Samuel Hargreaves, the reclusive millionaire who had revolutionized the country's rehabilitation clinic market. His grey eyes met hers with a disconcerting intensity, as if they could read every secret hidden in her soul. There was something familiar in that look, something that made her heart race for reasons she couldn't or didn't want to understand. Miss Santos, his voice was deep and melodious, with a slight accent that suggested years of education abroad. You don't know how long I've waited for this moment. Isabel felt her world spin slightly. How did a man like Samuel Hargreaves know who she was, Why had he called her here? And why, despite all the alarm bells ringing in her mind, did she feel irresistibly drawn to this surreal situation? The night was just beginning, and with it a story that would forever change the destiny of two souls marked by secrets, lies, and a desire impossible to ignore. Dinner was served at an antique mahogany table, under a starry sky that seemed to have been painted especially for that evening. Samuel wheeled his chair with studied precision to one end, while the waiter, discreet as a shadow, poured a red wine that exuded aromas of ripe fruit and oak. "You must be wondering why you are here," Samuel began, his fingers drumming softly on the arm of the chair. There was a natural elegance to his movements, even the subtlest ones, that belied his apparent physical limitations. "The kindness I am grateful for occurred long ago in a place I would rather not name." Isabel adjusted the napkin on her lap, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. "I confess I can't remember ever meeting him before." An enigmatic smile appeared on Samuel's lips. "We haven't met formally. You were at Santa Clara Hospital about 8 years ago. You were reading poetry to someone in one of the rooms." The air seemed to freeze in Isabel's lungs. Santa Clara Hospital. The psychiatric ward. Helena. The endless afternoons reading Rilke, trying to reach her sister through words, while she sank deeper and deeper into her own demons. "Like you." "My mother was hospitalized on the same floor," Samuel interrupted her gently. "I visited her every Wednesday, always at the same time, and I always heard her voice through the walls, reciting verses that seemed to give meaning to the chaos of that place." The first dish arrived, an artistic composition of ingredients Isabel barely recognized. Samuel continued, "There was something about your dedication, the way you turned poetry into healing, that left a deep impression on me. I spent years trying to find you after everything happened." The fire. Helena's violent lover. The night everything changed. Isabel felt the bitter taste of memory rise in her throat. "Why now?" "Because I've only just had the courage," he replied with an honesty that disarmed her, "and because perhaps now more than ever you need someone who understands." Their eyes met across the table, and Isabel felt something electric run down her spine. How could he know about her needs, about the threats of losing Alice, the bills, the nightmares that haunted her? "The accident that left me like this," he gestured to the wheelchair, "happened in Aspen 15 years ago. I was 20 and had all the arrogance a young heir could muster. A skiing fall that should have killed me, but instead taught me about limits and humility." There was something hypnotic in his voice, in the way he constructed each sentence as if they were verses of a poem yet to be written. Samuel spoke of literature with feverish passion, quoted obscure authors, and discussed philosophy as if he were breathing. The hours slipped like water through his fingers. It was only when the waiter served the coffee that Isabel noticed something strange. A sudden movement from Samuel as he reached for his cup. His fingers moved with a dexterity that seemed incompatible with someone supposedly paralyzed. It was an instant, a fraction of a second, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in her mind. "Can I be so bold?" he asked, breaking her thoughts. Without waiting for an answer, he made a sign and soft music filled the room. Piano notes played, with delicacy and precision. "It's a composition of mine. I've been using my elbows to play it since the accident. Music has been my way of keeping sane." The melody was mesmerizing, filled with a melancholy that seemed to echo Isabel's own feelings. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself be carried away by the almost magical atmosphere that had formed there. "You are an extraordinary woman, Isabel." Samuel's voice was closer now. She opened her eyes to find him beside her, his wheelchair positioned so that their faces were almost level. "Your strength, your dedication to your niece, your ability to face the world with dignity, even when it seems to conspire against you. How do you know so much about me?" she asked, a mixture of fascination and fear growing in her chest. "I have my resources," he smiled, but there was something different in his eyes now, an intensity that made her heart race. And I have a proposition for you. The driver, who had kept himself discreetly in the shadows all night, stepped forward as if on cue. Samuel gestured and he withdrew, leaving a new black envelope on the table. Inside this envelope is a solution to your financial problems, Samuel said, his voice taking on a more formal tone. A work contract. I want you to organize events, here at the hotel. Literary gatherings, cultural gatherings, something that will bring back the soul this place lost so long ago. Isabel took the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was heavy, expensive, like everything else that night. Why me? Because you turn words into magic, he said, and his hand found hers on the table. The touch was warm, firm, electric. And because 8 years ago, when you read poetry to your sister in that hospital, you saved not only her, but me. The moment was interrupted by a sharp sound. Isabel's cell phone. It was Donna Mila. Alice was having an asthma attack. The real world brutally invaded the fantasy bubble that had formed on the terrace of the Hotel Elysium. Isabel stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. I have to go. My daughter... I know, Samuel interrupted her. Victor will take you. And, Isabel... He caught her wrist as she turned to leave. Read the contract. Think about my proposal, please. The ride back was a blur of lights and confused thoughts. Victor, the driver, drove with the same military precision as before, but there was something different about his posture. An almost palpable tension. When they arrived at Donna Mila's house, Alice was already calmer, the nebulizer doing its silent work. The girl was sleeping on the couch, her cheeks still red from the effort of breathing. She's fine now, whispered Donna Mila, watching Isabel with barely concealed curiosity. But who are you, my dear? This elegant woman is not the same one who left here a few hours ago. Isabel didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain that for one night she had been a different person, someone who could dine in luxurious hotels and discuss literature with millionaires in wheelchairs. Someone who, for a few hours, forgot the weight of the world she carried on her shoulders. At home, after tucking Alice into bed and checking her breathing for the 10th time, Isabel finally opened the black envelope. The contract was real. The Hartz-Ditzi salary was generous beyond her wildest dreams. Benefits included health insurance for her and Alice, a chance to start over. But there was something else. A personal card from Samuel, with his cell phone number and a single handwritten line. Some people read poetry. Some people are poetry. That night, Isabel dreamed of a piano played by hands that shouldn't be able to move, of hanging gardens, and grey eyes that held secrets too big to contain. And for the first time in years, the dream wasn't a nightmare. The days that followed brought a new routine to Isabel's life. Mornings still began at the flower shop, amid the scent of hydrangeas and the tinkling of the doorbell, but afternoons now belonged to the Hotel Elysium. Samuel had insisted that she maintain her own business. To preserve your independence, he said, with that smile that never quite reached his eyes. Working at the hotel was unlike anything she had ever done before. Her hands, accustomed to arranging flowers and counting coins, now glided over cost sheets and guest lists. The first event was to be a literary soiree, combining classical music with poetry readings. Samuel seemed particularly interested in every detail in every decision she made. He would always appear at the most unexpected moments, his wheelchair gliding silently through the historic corridors of the hotel. Sometimes he would bring rare books from his private collection, first editions of poets Isabel only knew by name. Other times, he would simply stand there, watching her work with an intensity that made her blush without knowing exactly why. It was one of those afternoons, while they were discussing the arrangement of the tables for the soiree, that it happened. A sudden movement by Samuel caused a pile of papers to fall to the floor. Instinctively, he bent down to reach them, his muscles reacting with a coordination that completely contradicted his supposed condition. "You're not really paralyzed," Isabel said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed was thick as fog. Samuel sat up straight in his chair, his face a mask of studied calm. But there was something in his eyes, fear, guilt, That made her take a step back. "It's not that simple," he finally replied, his voice lower than usual. "There are things about me, about my life, that you wouldn't understand." "Try," she challenged, feeling a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Because right now all I see is a man who's constructed an elaborate lie, and I need to know why." Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, as if organizing long-held thoughts. When he opened them again, there was a vulnerability she had never seen before. "The paralysis was real at first," he began. "The accident in Aspen, the recovery, all of that happened. But I was able to recover gradually through experimental treatments and years of physical therapy. The problem is, when you spend so much time being seen a certain way, sometimes it's easier to maintain the illusion." "For what? To manipulate people to get what you want through pity?" "No." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "It's more complicated than that. The chair, it's become a protection, a filter between me and a world that has always expected too much of me. When people think you're physically limited, they let their guard down, show their true colors." Isabel felt the weight of that revelation like a punch in the stomach. All the conversations, the moments shared, the confidences exchanged, had it all been part of a sick social experiment? "And me? Am I also part of your study of human nature?" Samuel moved his chair closer to hers, so close that she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "You're different," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that seemed too real to be faked. "Ever since that day in the hospital when I heard you reading Rilke, I knew you were different. You never looked at me with pity, even though you believed in paralysis. You saw me as a person, not as a condition." "That doesn't justify lying," she replied, but her voice shook slightly. "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But it allowed me to get closer to you without the barriers that usually exist between people from such different worlds. It allowed me to get to know the real Isabel, not the version you would show to an arrogant millionaire." At that moment, Victor entered the room, his presence bringing a different tension to the room. There was something in the way he looked at Samuel, a mixture of contempt and something deeper, more personal. "Your brother called, sir," Victor announced, emphasizing the word brother in an odd way. "He insists on talking about the clinic's documents." Samuel stiffened visibly. "Tell him I'll call back." But Victor didn't move. Instead, he turned his gaze to Isabel, a thin smile forming on his lips. "Do you already know about the documents, about how our dear Samuel came by his fortune?" "Victor." Samuel's voice took on a tone of command that Isabel had never heard before. "That's enough." The driver gave a mocking little bow and left, leaving behind a silence filled with unasked questions. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that felt oddly vulnerable. "How long have you known Victor?" Isabel asked, following an instinct she didn't fully understand. "He's been working for my family for years," Samuel replied, but there was a hesitation in his voice that didn't go unnoticed. "It's complicated. Like everything else in your life, apparently," she commented, starting to gather her things. She needed to pick Alice up from school. She needed to get back to her reality. "Isabel," Samuel called when she was already at the door. "Please don't leave like that. Let me explain everything. Have dinner with me tonight on the terrace like the first time." She should say no. Every ounce of reason in her body screamed at her to walk away, to go back to her simple life of flowers and clear responsibilities. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a mixture of desperation and hope that made her hesitate. "At 8, she finally said, "and this time, I want the truth. All of it." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of confused thoughts and conflicting emotions. Alice could tell something was wrong. She always could. But she didn't ask any questions when Isabel left her with Donna Mila again. When she returned to the hotel that evening, wearing the same blue dress from their first meeting, the sky was heavy with clouds that promised a storm. The terrace had been prepared as it had been the first time, with lanterns and flowers, but there was a different atmosphere in the air. Samuel was waiting for her standing. Not in his wheelchair, but leaning against the balcony railing, his tall, elegant body silhouetted against the night sky. When he saw her, he made no move to hide his mobility. Instead, he walked toward her with firm, sure steps. "The truth," he said, reaching out to her. "It starts like this." The first drop of rain fell as Samuel began his story, as if the sky itself wanted to join in on that confession. They took shelter in a covered area of the terrace, where the glass waterfall created a liquid curtain between them and the rest of the world. "My mother," he began, his voice low and controlled, "wasn't just a patient at Santa Clara Hospital. She'd practically lived there in and out since I was a child. Her diagnosis changed depending on the doctor. Major depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. The only constant was her obsession with one of her patients, a man who believed he could predict the future." Isabel watched Samuel's profile against the diffuse light of the lamps, noticing how his fingers tightened around the glass of water he was holding. "Victor," he continued, "is my half-brother, the son of that same patient and my mother, a secret the family tried to bury for years, but which always found a way to surface." Thunder rumbled in the distance, making the hotel windows shake slightly. Samuel stood up, walking toward the glass, waterfall with steps that betrayed years of physical conditioning. The accident in Aspen was real, but the paralysis lasted only 8 months. The recovery was almost a medical miracle. But then I realized something. People were different when they thought I was vulnerable. Executives who had previously seen me as a rival now let their guard down. Women who were only interested in my money were quicker to show their true colors. "And it became a game," Isabel added, feeling a bitter taste in her mouth. "At first, yes," he admitted, turning to face her. "But then I saw you in that hospital, reading to your sister. There was so much truth in every word, so much real pain in your eyes. I spent years trying to find you again, imagining 1,000 different scenarios for our first meeting. Why not just approach normally? Why all this elaborate lying?" Samuel let out a humorless laugh. "What would I say? Hello, I'm the millionaire who kept spying on you in the mental hospital while you were trying to save your sister. Besides, Victor—" He stopped abruptly as if he had said more than he had intended, but Isabel would not let it go. "What about Victor?" "He's been manipulating me for years," Samuel confessed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "He uses the secret of his birth. He uses his position in the company. He uses every little mistake I've ever made. He was the one who suggested I keep up the wheelchair charade. He was the one who planned our first meeting. Why? Because he hates me." The simplicity of the answer carried the weight of decades of resentment. He hates that I had everything he never had: the family name, the privileged upbringing, the unconditional love of a father who wasn't even my biological father. At that moment, as if summoned by the conversation, Victor appeared at the entrance to the terrace. His military posture seemed even stiffer than usual, and there was something in his eyes that made Isabel shiver. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice thick with veiled irony, "but there's an urgent call from the hospital about Alice." Isabel's heart stopped for a second. "Alice, what happened?" "Her asthma attack got worse," Victor reported, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Miller took her to the emergency room." Isabel stood up in a rush, but Samuel was faster, gently grabbing her arm. "I'll take you. My car is faster." "That won't be necessary, sir," Victor intervened. "I've already arranged a driver for Miss Santos." Something was wrong. Isabel could feel it in the tension in the air, in the way Samuel and Victor stared at each other, in the way the rain was now falling full force, turning the night into a blur of sounds and shadows. "I'll go with you," Samuel declared, ignoring Victor's warning look. The drive to the hospital was an exercise in anxiety. Isabel tried to call Donna Mila, but it only went to voicemail. Samuel kept a hand on her knee, a gesture of comfort that seemed strangely intimate considering all the revelations of the night. But when they arrived at the hospital, there was no sign of Alice or Donna Mila. The receptionist, after checking the system, informed them that no child with that name had been admitted that night. "Impossible," Victor said, his voice still holding that controlled tone. "I got the call myself." "From whom?" Samuel asked, his voice sharp as steel. "Who?" Exactly, called Victor. The driver didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a manila envelope that he handed to Isabel in one fluid motion. Maybe that explains it better, he said, a thin smile forming on his lips. With trembling fingers, Isabel opened the envelope. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Photos of her and Alice over the years, photos of the fire that killed Helena, documents of the adoption, or rather, the lack thereof, and a court summons dated for the following week. "How?" she began, but her voice trailed off. "You should have done more research on your new employer, Miss Santos," Victor said, his voice now filled with grim satisfaction. "The rehab clinics are just the legal front for the family business. The real money comes from other places, places where information is worth more than gold." Samuel advanced towards Victor, but the driver was faster, retreating with the agility of someone who was prepared for that moment. "I have spent years piecing together every piece of this story," he continued, now addressing Samuel. "Every dirty secret, every well-constructed lie. And now, dear brother, you will understand what it is like to lose everything you love." The realization hit Isabel like a bolt of lightning. Alice. If Victor wasn't in the hospital, then where? "Where is my daughter?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "Your daughter?" Victor laughed, a cold, lifeless sound. "You don't even have any paperwork to prove it. How long did you think you could keep up this charade? An illegal adoption, a traumatized child, an aunt pretending to be a mother. The judge will love hearing this whole story." Samuel stepped forward, his face contorted into a mask of fury Isabel had never seen. "This is between us, Victor. Leave them out of it." "Too late, little brother," Victor replied, already heading for the exit. Too late. The night turned into a nightmare of sirens and red lights. Isabel and Samuel raced through the city streets in their sports car, while the rain pounded the windows with relentless force. Donna Mila had finally answered the phone. Alice was safe in her home, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the drama that was unfolding. "How did he know?" Isabel murmured repeatedly, her hands clutching the photos in the envelope so tightly that the papers began to crumple. "How did Victor find out about Helena, about the fire?" Samuel kept his eyes fixed on the wet road, his fingers white with tension around the steering wheel. Victor has always been obsessed with information. Ever since he was a child, he collected secrets the way other children collect figurines. And when the man who raised me died, he inherited control of part of the companies, including a network of private investigators. A clap of thunder split the sky, momentarily illuminating the interior of the car. In the brief flash, Isabel saw something on Samuel's face that frightened her more than all the revelations of the night. Pure, genuine fear. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Samuel took a deep breath, slowing down as he turned onto a narrow street. Rehab clinics. Victor hadn't completely lied. They're legitimate, they help real people, but there's a specific section, a department that deals with special cases. People who need to disappear for a while, change their identity, start over. "A private witness protection operation," Isabel finished, feeling her stomach churn. "Among other things," he admitted. "That's how I got so much information about you before we met. Victor used the framework I created to destroy." "Tammy!" They stopped in front of Donna Mila's house. Before Isabel could get out of the car, Samuel gently grabbed her wrist. "There's one more thing you need to know, about your sister, about the fire." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. "What do you know about Helena?" "The man who caused the fire, her ex-boyfriend, he was one of our clients. He was in the protection program because he testified against a criminal organization. Helena met him during one of her stays at Santa Clara, where he was being treated under a false identity." Isabel felt the air leave her lungs as if she had been punched. All the pieces were beginning to fit together. Helena's erratic behavior in the last months of her life, the mysterious phone calls, the money that appeared without explanation. "When he went crazy and started getting violent," Samuel continued, his voice low and filled with guilt. We should have seen the signs. We should have intervened. But Victor, he saw an opportunity. He let the situation escalate. He gathered information. He documented everything. To use against you, Isabel finished, feeling a wave of nausea. My sister died because your brother wanted ammunition for revenge. It's not that simple, Samuel tried to explain, but Isabel was already getting out of the car, the rain soaking her dress in seconds. Mrs. Miller opened the door before she could even knock. The lady looked worried, but Alice slept peacefully on the couch, her chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm. She's fine, Donna Miller whispered, watching Isabel examine the girl anxiously. She had a little wheezing earlier, but the medicine took care of it. Why are you so distressed, dear? Before Isabel could respond, a sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. Samuel, who had silently entered behind her, reacted instantly, pulling her behind him. Victor emerged from the shadows of the kitchen, holding something in his hands that glinted ominously in the lightning. What a touching scene, he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. The happy family together. Donna Miller, Samuel said without taking his eyes off his brother, take Alice to the room, now. The lady, realizing the gravity of the situation, picked up the sleeping girl and disappeared down the hallway. Victor made no move to stop her. What do you want? Isabel asked, her voice firmer than she felt. I want my dear brother to know what it's like to lose everything, Victor replied, taking a step forward. What it's like to watch your world fall apart and not be able to do anything about it. Tomorrow morning, every newspaper will be getting a full dossier on the illegal activities of the clinics, on how the great Samuel Hargreaves helps criminals escape justice, on how he manipulates vulnerable people for his own entertainment. You'll go down with me, Samuel warned. You're as guilty as I am. Victor laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. You think I care? I've spent my entire life being your shadow, your bastard brother, your family's dirty secret. Now it's your turn to experience the darkness. It was then that Alice appeared at the hallway door, awakened by the noise. Her big eyes widened as she saw the scene. Victor with something metallic in his hand, Samuel in a defensive position, Isabel pale as a ghost. "Mommy!" she called, her voice small and scared. Everything happened very quickly after that. Victor turned sharply when he heard the girl's voice. Samuel took advantage of the distraction to advance. There was a flash of metal, a scream, the sound of bodies falling. And then, silence. A heavy silence, interrupted only by the rain that continued to fall outside and Alice's labored breathing, who was beginning to show signs of another asthma attack. Samuel's blood stained Donna Miller's beige carpet in a jagged pattern that resembled the petals of Isabel's hydrangeas. Victor had disappeared into the stormy night, leaving behind only the cold glint of his knife and the echo of his bitter laughter. At the hospital, the hours dragged on like decades as the doctors worked to stabilize Samuel. Alice slept in Isabel's lap, her breathing still irregular even after the emergency nebulization. Donna Miller had insisted on accompanying them, her wooden rosary clicking softly between her gnarled fingers as she murmured ancient prayers. "Miss Santos," a deep voice cut through the silence of the waiting room. A man in a dark suit and a police badge approached. "I'm Chief Ribeiro. We need to talk about tonight's events." Isabel felt her heart race. Careful not to wake Alice, she followed the police officer to a private room, leaving the girl in the care of Donna Miller. "We found some interesting things in Mr. Victor Hargreaves' house," the deputy began, opening a thick folder on the desk. "Files, recordings, documents that go back over 2 decades. Apparently he's been meticulously plotting his revenge." "Revenge against Samuel?" "Against the entire Hargreaves family," he corrected. "The documents show a pattern of obsession and manipulation that began when he discovered his true origins. But there is something specific about your sister, Helena, that you need to know." Isabel felt the air grow heavier. "What's wrong, Helena?" "The fire was not an accident, nor a crime of passion as reported," the sheriff explained, his voice softening. "It was premeditated. Victor had discovered that Helena was pregnant again, this time by the man he had purposely put in her path, a man with a history of violence whom Victor controlled through blackmail." The world seemed to spin around Isabel. So was all this time. Victor orchestrated every detail, the sheriff confirmed. He wanted to create a situation that he could use against Samuel eventually. Helena was just a pawn in his game, just like you and Alice later became. Silent tears began to stream down Isabel's face. All the pain, all the grief, all the struggle to raise Alice, all part of a sick plan for revenge. Mrs. Santos, the police chief continued after a respectful pause, there is one more thing. We found legitimate adoption documents, dated 8 years ago with your signature and that of your sister, documents that gave you full custody of Alice in the event of Helena's death. But that's impossible. I would never... The documents are real, he assured. Apparently, Samuel arranged them shortly after the fire, using his connections and resources. He kept everything secret to protect you and Alice from Victor. The door to the room opened softly, and a nurse poked her head in. Officer, Mr. Hargreaves is awake. He's asking to see Mrs. Santos. The hallway to Samuel's room seemed endless. Each step echoed in Isabel's ears like a distant drum, marking the rhythm of revelations she had yet to fully process. Samuel was pale against the white hospital sheets, but his grey eyes held that familiar intensity. A thick bandage covered his left shoulder, where Victor's knife had found its mark. You should have told me, Isabel said softly, stopping beside the bed. About the adoption papers, about everything. I wanted to, he replied, his voice hoarse, but I was afraid Victor would find out. He always knew too much, always was one step ahead. I needed to protect you and Alice. Why? Why care so much about two strangers? Samuel tried to adjust himself in the bed, grimacing in pain. Because in that hospital 8 years ago, you showed me that there was still good in the world. When I saw you with Helena, reading poetry, trying to reach her through words, it was the first time in years I felt something real, something that wasn't tainted by Victor's manipulations or the weight of the Hargreaves empire. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, allowing her hands to find his. What about the wheelchair? Why keep up that particular lie? Because I needed to know if you were real, he admitted. If what I'd seen in the hospital was true, the chair, it was a way to test people, to see beyond social masks. With you, it became an emotional crutch. I was so afraid that you'd see me as just another rich man trying to buy his way into your life. A small noise at the door interrupted them. Alice was there, still in her Batman pajamas, holding Donna Mila's hand. Her big eyes studied Samuel with that peculiar wisdom that only children possess. You're not in the wheelchair anymore, she observed, approaching cautiously. No, Samuel answered honestly. I'm sorry I lied. Alice considered this for a moment, then shrugged with the simplicity of childhood. It's all right. Mom says sometimes people do the wrong things for the right reasons. Isabel felt her heart tighten when she heard Alice call her mommy so naturally. Now, with the documents legalized, she no longer needed to correct this small act of love. And you? Samuel asked Isabel, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made the world around them disappear. Can you forgive someone who did wrong things for the right reasons? The answer was there in the rapid beating of her heart, in the warmth of their clasped hands, in the way fate had woven their stories together through pain and redemption. Maybe, she whispered, leaning closer, we can learn to do the right things for the right reasons, together. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass. A new day was dawning, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and second chances. And in the hospital room, amidst heart monitors and the smell of antiseptic, two hearts wounded by life began to heal, finding in each other the cure they had always sought. Days in the hospital turned into weeks, and the weeks brought with them a new routine. Isabel divided her time between the flower shop, which now had a helper courtesy of Samuel, Alice, and visits to room 507, where the Hargreaves empire was slowly being rebuilt between physiotherapy sessions and business calls. Victor's story had leaked to the press, but not in the way he had planned. Instead of headlines about corporate scandals, the papers were reporting on a family drama of Shakespearean proportions. The illegitimate son who spent decades plotting his revenge, the brother who protected vulnerable families through a secret relocation program, the love story that grew from the ashes of tragedy. Samuel recovered faster than doctors expected, his determination fueled by a desire to right the wrongs of the past. The rehabilitation clinics underwent a complete restructuring, transforming the protection program into a legal and transparent initiative, working in partnership with authorities to help real victims of violence. On a particularly hot October afternoon, while Alice sat drawing on the floor of the hospital room, Samuel made a request that took Isabel by surprise. "I want you to read to me," he said, holding out a worn book of poetry, "like you used to read to Helena." Isabel recognized the worn cover immediately. It was an old edition of Rilke, the same one she had carried with her during her days at the Santa Clara. "How did you—" "I found it at a used bookstore," Samuel explained, a small smile playing on his lips. "I recognized your notes in the margins. You always underlined the lines that talked about transformation." With slightly trembling hands, Isabel opened the book to a marked page. There, underlined in faded blue ink, were the lines she had so often read to her sister. "Who has not sat anxious before the curtain of his heart?" "You really were there," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "All those days, all those readings, every moment," Samuel confirmed, his hand finding hers over the underlined verse. "Your words were like light coming through cracks in a dark room. You didn't just save Helena in those days, you saved all of us who were lost in those hallways." Alice looked up from her drawings and watched the scene with that keen perception which always surprised grown-ups. "Mother," she called, "will you read to us both, as you used to do when I was little?" The request was simple, but it carried the weight of all the nights Isabel had held Alice through nightmares about the fire, whispering poetry like improvised lullabies. With a gentle nod, she began to read. Her voice, low and melodious, filled the room with words of love, loss, and rebirth. Samuel closed his eyes, letting himself be carried away by the rhythm of the verses, while Alice returned to her drawings, occasionally murmuring along words she already knew by heart. It was at that moment, between stanzas of a poem about metamorphosis, that Samuel made another request, this one even more surprising than the first. "Marry me," he said simply, opening his eyes to look at her with that intensity that still made her heart skip a beat. Isabel stopped in the middle of a verse, the book trembling slightly in her hands. "Samuel, not because of the documents or the press or anything related to what happened," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Marry me because after a lifetime of pretending to be someone else, you make me want to be exactly who I am." Alice had stopped drawing, her wide eyes traveling between the two adults with barely contained anticipation. "You don't have to answer now," Samuel added quickly. "I know there's still a lot to be resolved, a lot to be healed." "Yes," Isabel interrupted him, surprised, at the firmness of her own voice. "Yes," he repeated as if he didn't believe it. "Yes," she confirmed, a smile spreading across her face. "Because after a lifetime of protecting secrets, you make me want to share all the truths." Alice let out a small cry of joy, her drawings forgotten as she jumped up to hug them both. The book of poems fell to the floor, opening to a new page, this one without any markings or underlining, waiting to receive its own stories. The afternoon sun streamed in through the hospital window, transforming the moment into a golden photograph of promise and possibility. Outside, the city continued its frenetic pace, oblivious to the small miracle unfolding in room 507, two souls marked by the past, finding in love the courage to write a new future. Samuel pulled Isabel closer, his kiss tasting like poetry and promises kept. Alice, still holding them both, began to hum a tune she had learned in school, something about flowers growing after the rain, about light finding its way through shadows. And there, amidst monitored heartbeats and the smell of antiseptic, mixed with the perfume of the flowers that Isabel always brought, a new family was formed. Not perfect, not without scars, but real as the underlined verses in an old book of poetry, as the love that is born from the ruins, as the truth that finally finds its voice. News of Samuel Hargreaves's marriage to the local florist spread like wildfire through the city's social circles. The tabloids desperately tried to construct a sensational narrative, The millionaire who pretended to be paraplegic, the humble girl with a murky past, the child whose very existence raised uncomfortable questions. But the truth, as always, was much deeper and more complex than any headline could capture. Samuel was discharged from the hospital on a November morning, just as the first breezes of summer were beginning to warm the city. Contrary to all expectations of high society, he did not return to his luxurious penthouse in the city centre. Instead, he moved into Isabel's small apartment, where Alice had prepared a welcome banner decorated with paper flowers and verses of poetry copied in her childish handwriting. "We don't have to stay here," Isabel said that first night, watching Samuel try to make himself comfortable on the modest sofa in the living room. "Your house is much more—" "My home is where you are," he interrupted, pulling her into his lap with that gentle strength that still surprised her. "Besides, there's something special about starting our story in a place that already knows so much love." The walls of the apartment were silent witnesses to years of struggle. Nights when Isabel would rock Alice after nightmares about the fire, mornings of creative accounting to make money last until the end of the month, moments of doubt and fear about the future. Now those same walls were beginning to absorb new kinds of memories. Samuel transformed the makeshift office into a small music studio, where he spent hours playing the piano, now without having to pretend to be physically disabled. Alice, fascinated by the instrument, began taking lessons, her small fingers dancing over the keys with a determination reminiscent of her biological mother. Mornings at the flower shop took on a new rhythm. Isabel still arrived early to arrange the flowers, but now she had company. Samuel would show up with coffee and fresh bread sitting on the stool behind the counter to work on his laptop while she helped customers. Every now and then, he would look up from his spreadsheets just to watch her work, a soft smile playing on his lips. "What's wrong?" she asked, blushing under his intense gaze. "I'm just admiring how you transform simple flowers into works of art," he replied, but his eyes said so much more. They said about redemption, about second chances, about love that rises from the ashes like a stubborn phoenix. Life, however, was not all sweet moments. Victor was still at large, his shadow looming over them like a distant storm cloud. Investigators found occasional clues: a bank withdrawal in another country, a fake passport used at some remote border. But he always seemed one step ahead. One particularly difficult night, after Alice had finally fallen asleep, Samuel found Isabel on the balcony, staring out at the illuminated city. "He'll be back," she said without turning around. It wasn't a question. Samuel hugged her from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "Probably. Victor has always been driven by obsession, but this time we'll be prepared." "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice little more than a whisper. "Not for me, but for Alice, for you, for everything we've built." "Fear is natural," he replied, turning her in his arms so he could see her eyes. "But we can't let it paralyze us, not after everything we've overcome to get here." That same night, while the city slept, they made love for the first time. It wasn't like the ones in sugary romance novels or Hollywood movies. It was real, with all the imperfections and beauty that reality carries. There were nervous laughs, moments of hesitation, scars, both physical and emotional, exposed in the soft light of the lampshade. Samuel kissed each mark on her body as if they were verses from a sacred poem. Isabel traced the lines of his fresh scar on his shoulder, the one that carried the story of how he had nearly died to protect them. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So beautiful it hurts to look at sometimes." "Even with all the marks?" she asked, her vulnerability slipping away for a moment. "Especially with them," he replied. "Every mark tells a story of survival, of strength, of love." Dawn found them, tangled in the sheets, their breathing synchronized as if their bodies had spent their entire lives rehearsing for this moment. The sound of the city slowly waking up mingled with the distant tinkling of the bell from the flower shop downstairs, where the assistant must have already been opening the shop. "We need to get up," Isabel murmured, though she made no move to move away. "5 more minutes," Samuel replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "The world can wait a little." A noise coming from Alice's room brought them back to reality. The girl was waking up and would soon come looking for them with her morning drawings and her endless questions about the universe. "I love you," Samuel said suddenly, as if the words could no longer be contained. "I love every part of you. The florist who turns arrangements into poetry, the mother who moves mountains for her daughter, the woman who taught me to be true." Isabel felt hot tears stream down her cheeks, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure, simple joy. "I love you too," she replied, "the man behind the masks, the scarred warrior, the father Alice always dreamed of having." The sound of small footsteps in the hallway announced that their moment of privacy was coming to an end. But there was no sadness in it, only the sweet anticipation of another day in their new life, a life built on hard but honest truths, on love that survives storms, on family that is chosen and conquered with each dawn. Preparations for the wedding were moving forward amidst the established routine of the small family. Isabel had insisted on a simple ceremony, something intimate that would reflect the true essence of their story. Samuel, to the surprise of his advisors, readily agreed. The Elysium Hotel, the site of their first meeting, would be the perfect setting to formalize a union that already existed in their hearts. However, fate still had one last twist in store for the story. With just 2 weeks to go before the ceremony, a letter arrived, not by mail nor by messenger. It was found on the counter of the florist on a Monday morning, the black envelope identical to the one that had started this whole story. "Dear brother," the letter began, in Victor's precise handwriting, "I imagine that by now you are already planning your happy ending with your little fairy tale family. How touching, how predictable, how absolutely nauseating." Samuel read the letter aloud in the police office, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Isabel held his hand tightly as Chief Ribeiro scribbled notes on his pad. "But you should know better than anyone, Samuel, that happy endings are for people who don't carry as much blood on their hands as we Hargreaves. You may have convinced your sweet flower girl that you're a changed man, but we both know the truth. We know about Paris, about Amsterdam, about all the lives our protection program has actually destroyed." The sheriff looked up from his notes. "What are these stories?" "Old cases," Samuel replied after a moment's hesitation. "Situations where our program was used in questionable ways. Before the restructuring." "You never told me about this," Isabel said softly, "not as an accusation but as a statement of fact." "Because I am deeply ashamed of that time," he admitted. "But Victor is right about one thing. I can't run away from my past. I can't just pretend those mistakes didn't happen." The letter continued. "So, dear brother, I propose one last act in our little family play. A reunion, you and I. No police, no tricks. Just two brothers settling their scores as they should have done long ago. You know where to find me. The place where it all began, where our mother finally lost her mind completely." Delegate Ribeiro frowned. "What place would that be?" "The old psychiatric ward at Santa Clara," Samuel replied, his voice thick with bitter memories. "Room 237, that's where our mother had her last breakdown after discovering she was pregnant by the patient she believed to be a prophet." "It's a trap," Isabel said immediately. "You can't go." "I have to go," Samuel replied, turning to face her. "It's the only way to end this once and for all, to make sure he never threatens our family again." The officer cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "The hospital has been abandoned for years. It would be the perfect place for an ambush." "That's why I need you and your team to be prepared," Samuel said. "Not inside the hospital. Victor would know, but nearby, ready to act at the first sign of trouble." The next few hours were a whirlwind of tactical planning and heated discussions. Isabel refused to be left out, even when Samuel begged her to stay home with Alice. "We're a family now," she declared, with a firmness that brooked no argument. "We've faced everything together." Night came too quickly. Santa Clara Hospital loomed against the night sky like a sleeping giant, its broken windows reflecting the moonlight like empty eyes. Samuel and Isabel walked through the abandoned hallways hand in hand, their footsteps echoing off the peeling walls. Room 237 was exactly as Samuel remembered it. Walls yellowed with age, a rusty iron bed in the corner, torn curtains dancing in the breeze that came through the glassless windows. And there, sitting in a chair in the center of the room, was Victor. How touching, he said as he watched them enter together. The couple in love facing the villain. Should I applaud? It's over, Victor, Samuel said, his voice firm. You've lost. All your evidence has been seized. Your contacts are trapped. There's nothing left to destroy. Victor smiled, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Always so smug, little brother. Always thinking you know everything. He stood slowly, something glinting in his hand in the dim light. But you forgot the most important lesson our dear mother taught us. Sometimes destruction is an end in itself. Everything happened very quickly after that. Victor advanced with the same knife he had used in Donna Mila's house. Samuel pushed Isabel back, placing himself between her and his brother. There was a flash of metal, a scream, the sound of breaking glass, and then silence. A silence different from that of the night in Donna Mila's house. A final silence, punctuated only by the distant sound of sirens approaching and the soft crying of Isabel, who held Samuel in her arms, while Victor's blood formed a dark pool on the floor of room 237. It's over, Samuel whispered, his hands shaking slightly as he touched Isabel's face. It's really over. Outside, the first light of morning was beginning to tint the sky pink and gold. A new day was dawning, bringing with it the promise of peace they had sought so long for. Victor had chosen his end, just as his mother had chosen hers so many years before in that very room. But this time, from the shadows of the past, a new story emerged. A story of redemption, of true love, of family built on the foundations of honesty and courage. A story that began with a black envelope and would end with a yes before an altar, proving that even in the darkest nights, light always finds its way. The wedding took place exactly 1 month after the events at the Santa Clara Hospital. The terrace of the Elysium Hotel had been transformed. Thousands of white and blue hydrangeas created an ethereal atmosphere, their delicate petals dancing in the gentle evening breeze. The glass waterfall, a silent witness to Samuel and Isabel's first meeting, now reflected the colors of the sunset, dyeing the entire space in golden and pink tones. Alice, wearing a dress she had helped choose herself, carried a small basket of flower petals. Her large eyes shone with pure joy that made the hearts of everyone present clench. Donna Mila, sitting in the front row, made no effort to hide the tears that ran freely down her wrinkled face. When Isabel appeared at the entrance to the terrace, the world seemed to stop for a moment. She wore a simple champagne silk dress, but it was her smile that lit up the entire room. In her hands was a bouquet of blue hydrangeas, the same flowers she used to arrange on the counter of her small flower shop, now symbolizing the beginning of a new chapter. Samuel waited for her at the makeshift altar, his gray eyes filled with emotion. There was no wheelchair, no masks, no lies, just a man who had found his redemption in the love of a woman who taught him to be true. "You look beautiful," he whispered when she reached his side. "You're crying," she replied with a soft smile. "These are tears of gratitude," he admitted, "for finding you, for surviving, for being here." The celebrant began the ceremony, but his words seemed distant, as if coming through a veil of pure emotion. Samuel and Isabel had written their own vows, words that carried the weight of their journey and the lightness of their love. "Isabel," Samuel began, his voice steady despite the emotion, "before you I lived hidden behind masks, protected by lies I thought were necessary. You taught me that true strength lies in vulnerability, that true love is born from honesty. I promise to spend the rest of my life being the man you helped me discover I could be." Silent tears streamed down Isabel's face as she began her vows. "Samuel, you came into my life as a mystery, an enigma I didn't know if I wanted to unravel. But each layer I uncovered, each truth that emerged only made me love you more deeply. I promise to always be your safe haven, your partner, your truth in a world of uncertainty." Alice approached with the rings, simple white gold bands with Rilke's verses engraved on the inside. Who has not sat anxious before the curtain of his heart? When the celebrant pronounced them husband and wife, the sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and violet. The kiss that sealed their union was soft and deep, carrying silent promises of a future built on the foundations of true love and honesty. The reception that followed was intimate and elegant, just as they had planned. Alice danced with Samuel, her tiny feet on his, while Isabel watched them with her heart overflowing with love. Doña Mila told anyone who would listen how she had witnessed this love story from the beginning, proud of her role as guardian and confidant. Later, when the music had faded and most of the guests had left, Samuel and Isabel danced slowly beneath. The stars, the terrace now lit only by hundreds of tiny lights, seemed suspended in time and space. "Did you know this was the exact place you were when I first saw you?" Samuel murmured against her hair. "You were arranging flowers for an event, completely oblivious to the fact that you were changing my life forever." Isabel lifted her face to look at him, her eyes reflecting the lights around them. "And now?" "How do you feel?" "Like I'm finally home," he replied, leaning in to kiss her softly. Alice joined them on the dance floor, her small arms wrapped around both of their waists. Together, they formed a small circle of love and protection, a family, built not by blood but by choices, forgiveness, and courage. The Hotel Elysium, with its story of pain and redemption, would now hold yet another memory within its ancient walls. The story of a man who found his truth in the love of a florist, of a woman who discovered her strength in her ability to forgive, and of a girl who gained not only a family, but a real fairy tale, with all its moments of darkness and light. As the night wore on, the hydrangeas continued to dance in the breeze, their petals occasionally falling away to float in the air like tiny messages of hope. On the horizon, the city lights shone like earthly stars, silent witnesses to a love that had survived lies, revenge, and pain to emerge stronger, truer, more real. Samuel and Isabel remained on the terrace long after the last guest had left, their bodies intertwined in a slow dance that seemed to have no end. They needed no words, their hearts beat in unison, their souls finally at peace after so much turmoil. "Forever," Isabel whispered against Samuel's chest. "Forever," he confirmed, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sealed not only a promise of eternal love, but also the end of a story of pain and the beginning of a new journey, a journey of truth, redemption, and unconditional love. And so, under a starry sky and surrounded by the scent of hydrangeas, a new story began. A story no longer marked by secrets and lies, but built on the foundations of honesty and courage. A love story that proved that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find your true path back home.